Good afternoon. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Yevamos daf chaf beis, and we're starting 5 lines or so from the bottom on daf chaf aleph from the beis. We're starting at the first of the very long lines. We're in the midst of a discussion of shnios. Shnios are shiur d'Rabbanan that apply to specific cases of yibum and to marriage and to arayos. And what we're going to do today is dig still a little bit deeper and then move into an easier sugya to learn. This one is not as complicated as some of the other ones that we're going to learn. Let's jump right back in. Maimar taught us, and Maimar says 5 lines from the bottom, Achshir, he says it was permissible in the following cases. This would be the case of Be'esha Sachia V'Aviv, the father's brother's wife, and as well Uve'achosa V'Aviv, talking about the father's sister. Those 2 cases are permissible. Amar le Rav Hillel le Rav Ashi, he says, L'didi Chazyali, he says, I saw with my own 2 eyes, Shnios Mar Berei de Ravna, I saw that what he had written down on a piece of paper, Uchsivan Shistzrei the Isura, and he said that there are 16 cases that fall into the category of Shnios. My lav Tamne Demas Nisa. Isn't it true that 8 of them are the ones that we learned yesterday? The Shister of Chia, 6 of them were in the name of Rav Chia, which we'll learn about later today. The Hanach Tarti, in these 2 cases that Maimar says are permissible, well, how can he say they're permissible? Says the Gemara, Hashistre, that should be 16, which seems to imply that these 2 cases that Maimar allowed really shouldn't be allowed. Says the Gemara, Ula Ta'amech, according to your reasoning, there's another case that's very similar, in which case, Shivsrei Havyan, it really should be 17. What was that case? Ha'ika Eshes Achi Ha'im Min Ha'im Tepashtina Isura. You have the mother's brother's wife, where the mother and brother are related only on the maternal side, not the paternal side. In that case, it's Asur as well, should have been included in the Shnios, but it was not. Says the Gemara, Halokasha. The numbers issue of 17 cases versus 16 is not a problem, because Hanach Tarte Damyan Lahadade Kechada Chashiv Lahu. The 2 cases that Maimar was discussing, those 2 cases are very similar, and therefore the total is 16. Says the Gemara, nevertheless, nevertheless, even if we can work out the number of how many Isurim there are, but at the end of the day, Marbre de Ravna had written down these cases le Isura, and Maimar wrote down that the cases are mutter. Says the Gemara, Amar Leu l'tamech, you have a ksiva lehetera. Had you seen a list of leniencies, not a list of rabbinic stringencies, would you have leaned on it? Mihava samches alayhu demar berei de Ravna, michasim alayhu. Did he sign that piece of paper? Maybe you were just looking at the scribbles. He was looking things over. He wrote things down. You would have married someone based on that piece of paper? No, of course not. Hashtanami dechsiv leisura. So too, yeah, he included the 2 cases of Maimar leisura, but maybe he wasn't done thinking about it. Lav mar berei de Ravna chasim alayhu. He hasn't signed on that either. So you're taking it a little too far that you saw this piece of paper of mar berei de Ravna. It's not a machriya, and we can't make any decisions accordingly. What are the shnios of Reb Chia that were just mentioned? Reb Chia also had a list of Isurei D'Rabbanan that applied to arayos. So to that, the Gemara says 7 or 8 lines down on Chaf Beis Meralev Tani Debei Reb Chia Shlishi She Bibno Vishe Bibito. The 3rd generation down of Bibno and Bibito, that would be forbidden for a person to marry, and as well V'shebe ben Ishto, V'shebe bas Ishto, Shnia. Those are all Shnios, those are all Isurei D'Rabbanan. And Rashi gives us an indicator as to what this case is talking about. Rashi says on the 2nd line, Dibur Hamaschil, Shlishi She Bibno, Bas, the daughter of Ben Bino, the daughter of his grandson, Deha Bas Bino Erva, that has a status of Erva. And then, as well, the Gemara back inside concludes another possible case where Rav Chia says that there's a Shnia, that there's an Isur D'Rabbanan. Revi'i Shebechama V'Shebechamoso, the 4th generation of, on the in-laws side, V'Shebechamoso Shnia, that's also Isur D'Rabbanan. What's that case talking about? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi on the 4th line says, Revi'i Shebechama, Do Revi'i Shebechama, the 4th generation relating to his in-laws. Hainu, Aim Chama, the grandmother, so his wife's mother, the wife is included in this case. We'll discuss that in a minute. Why is it that in the first, we're talking about the same number of generations? It's 4 generations with the first case where he said it's Shlishi. He said the case, and Rav Chia said Shlishi Shebibno V'Shebibito, and we said it's the 4th generation, but it's only referred to as the 3rd. Yet when it comes to the Chamoso, to his wife's side of the family, it's Revi. So says the Gemara, Amar Le Ravina Le Rabashi, Ma'ishna the Mala de Kachashiv La Ishto. Why is it that when we were counting the generations as it relates to the Shnia, the Isur D'Rabbanan on the wife's side of the family, the Revi'i Shebechama, why did we count the wife there? But in the first case of Reb Chia, where he said Shlishi Shebibno, there he doesn't include the person himself. So why is it that it's the same number of generations? If you look at it on a piece of paper, it's still 4 generations a pop. So why is it that in the first case we said shlishi, and in regards to his wife's family we said revi? The Gemara gives a very practical answer. Because in order to get to the in-laws side of the family at all, you have to first be married to the wife. That's what the Gemara says. Because he needs his wife to marry in order to get into that side of the family, therefore chashivle. However, lamata, moving downward, which is a reference to shlishi shebibno, the 4 generations below him, the isur lav mikoach ishto kaasi, that isur comes about because of the man himself having nothing to do with his wife, it's just a din in him. Therefore, lo kachashivle, therefore we didn't factor her in. That's why one case only says 3 people, excluding the wife, and the second case says 4 people, including the wife. Says the Gemara, but we have another case. We have another case where the wife was not included. What was that case? It's ben ishto o bas ishto, the grandchild, the child of a wife and the daughter of a wife. To isur mikoach ishto, all of that is due to the wife, yet she's not considered. You're right. Says the Gemara, you're right. Third of the way down, Chav Beis Mid Aleph. Aidi detana shlosha doros lamato didei velo chashva. Tanya nami gimel doros lamato didei velo chashva. Because as it relates to him, since by him we didn't include it, we didn't include him in that count. So the same is going to be true on her side of the family. We won't include her. Bit of a difficult answer because the previous answer was specifically not this way, but nevertheless that's the case. Says the Gemara, third of the way down still. Amar le Rav Ashi, the Rav Kahana, shnios tebei Reb Chia yesh lan hefsek o ein lan hefsek. When we saw the Dinei D'Rabbanan of Rav Ashi, of Reb Chia, do we say that they have hefsek or not? Yesterday we learned about this idea of hefsek. Hefsek is where that one generation, that one person is asur, but the generations above and below that person are perfectly mutter. Does that apply here? Yes or no? Answer number 1. Toshma Dama Rav Dalim Nashim Yeshlam Hefsek Vasula. When we saw the Gemara yesterday about Hefsek, Rav said that there were 4, and this one wasn't included, so therefore it must not be included, it must not have a din of Hefsek, which means that the generations before and after these people, older and younger, should be perfectly mutter. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Dilma ka'amar Rav, he must nisa. Maybe Rav is only talking about the content of that Mishnah, but he might agree in regards to Reb Chia's dinim that maybe there is a din of Hefsek. So therefore the Gemara attempts another answer to determine whether or not the Isurei D'Rabbanan that Reb Chia lists are in the category of Hefsek or not. Toshma, Shlishi v'Revi. The Brisa that Reb Chia quoted had the word Shlishi, 3rd generation, and Revi, 4th generation. Maybe Shlishi v'Revi in Tfelo. Maybe when we say 3 and 4, we're being very exacting. Those are the case, but nothing else. Only the people in the 3rd generation or the 4th generation, depending on which case. But the generations before and after are totally fine. Therefore, we would assume that there might be hefsek in regards to Reb Chia's Dinei D'Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, yeah, it's possible, but also Dilma, it's also possible halfway down. Bishlishi va'elech and me'revi va'elech. That really, it's everyone from there on has the same halachic status, and maybe we cannot learn as to whether or not there's any hefsek. Amar le Rava the Rav Nachman, Chazi mar hai mi Rabbanan da asimi ma'ar Rava. We saw that there was something that came out of Torah's Eretz Yisrael. Someone came from Eretz Yisrael. V'amar, they said as follows. Bo b'ma'ar Rava. They asked a question in Eretz Yisrael. Gazru shnios begerim o lo gazru shnios begerim. We have a fundamental assumption that when a person is a ger, they are halachically severed from their initial family when they become a ger. So technically speaking, you can marry family members. We don't do that. We'll see why in a moment. But our question is in regards to a ger, where their family members really have no halachic tie to them at all. Is there a din of shnios by them? Do we have dinim where had the other person also become a ger? Let's say his sister became a gioris. Can they get married? Because now they're no longer related to one another. So says the Gemara, do we say that there are shnios, dinei d'Rabbanan in regards to gerim, or lo gazru shnios begerim? Yes or no? Says the Gemara, Amar lehashta, now we have to say the following. Uma erva gufa, an erva gufa, a ger marrying someone who's mamish, an erva on paper, a sister, he's a ger now, and if she's a gioris, they're not siblings anymore. So says the Gemara, ma erva gufa, ilav shelo yomru bain miktusha chamur lektusha kala, lo gazru b'hu Rabbanan, if not for the fact that the optics are not good, that the ger and the Giores, who were siblings in a previous life, but after the Gerus, and now they're not related anymore. So maybe they should, maybe they can be the kedusha and they can marry. There we only have a din d'Rabbanan, shnios mibaya. Of course, when it comes to dinei d'Rabbanan that are far down the road, we're for sure not going to be concerned about that by a ger. So says the Gemara, good answer. Next, 2/3 of the way down, connected still to the ger. Amar of Nachman Gerim, and now that we're talking about Gerim, says the Gemara, Ho'il v'asu liyadan nema b'hu milsa. Now that we're talking about the sugya of Gerim, we're going to talk about something in regards to Gerim. Achen min ha'im lo ya'idu. If you have brothers who are Gerim and they have the same mother, they should not give any testimony. However, v'im he'idu, Edus and Edus. We know, of course, that Edim cannot be related to one another. But here, if they're both Gerim, then they're not related to one another. Yet we have a rabbinic injunction against it, but nevertheless, if in fact they give Edus, the Edus counts. What about Achin min ha'av? If you have brothers who are paternally related in a previous iteration before Gerus, and now they've done Gerus, Meidin l'chatchila. Says the Gemara, they don't need no hesitations at all. They're not related to one another after the Gerus, and therefore they can give testimony. Memar argues with Rav Nachman to say that even if they only have a maternal bond, these two brothers, and then they do Gerus, that's also mutter l'chatchila, because they're not related to one another. So says the Gemara, if they're not related to one another, why is it that we are more makbid when it comes to arayos than we are by edus? So says the Gemara, Erva l'kol masura. When it comes to Erva, everybody knows what's going on, and the optics here are not very good. So we have to have a din of Erva, a din of arayos when it comes to the Gerim. However, Edus lebezdin masura v'gershin is gayer kikatan shenoladami. As it relates to Edus, that's only a din in bezdin. It's not a din in la kol masura. It's not handed out to everyone. Only certain people are going to be eligible for this in the first place, and it's only in the scope of bezdin, but doesn't apply to everyone. We're going to be more mekel, and then the Gemara takes a very large principle that we know from the world of that we know from the world of Gerus, that Ger sheniskayer kekatan shenola dami, that they have no strings attached to the previous life prior to Gerus. No Mishnah. If somebody has a brother mikol makom under all circumstances, obviously referencing an atypical brother. We'll discuss what this means in the Gemara. In that case, zokek es eshes echav yibum. So that does generate a case of yibum, even if that brother is atypical. We'll discuss what that means. Ve'echav hu l'chol davar, and in fact, this unique atypical brother is his brother in all ways. Chutz mi sheyesh lo ach min hashifcha umin ha'ovedes kochavim. Unless the woman is a shifcha maidservant or avedes kochavim, someone who is a goy mamish. So Misha Yeshlo Ben, what about a child who is a Ben Mikol Makom, a child who has an atypical status? Here too, B'Gemara Mefarish, we'll see what it means. Poter Eshes Aviv Min Hayibum. If that child is a child, even if he's an atypical one, he potters everyone from Yibum, the father. If the father then passes away, there would be no din of Yibum whatsoever. And in fact, there would be a din, a punishment for that child for hitting his father and cursing out his father. In fact, he is considered a child for all halachic purposes, unless the child was the product of a shifcha, a maidservant, or a vedes kochavim, or a goy mamish. The Gemara opens Mikol Makom La'asuye Mai in the Reisha, where we said that it's an atypical brother. What kind of brother are we talking about? Says the Gemara, Amar Yehuda La'asuye Mamzer. Even if the brother is a mamzer, he still is a brother as it relates to Yibum. Says the Gemara, Pshita Achiv. Why is that unique? Everybody knows that that's true because he's his brother. Says the Gemara, Mahu Detema. You might have thought Leilaf. You might have thought that the profile of a brother who is subject to Yibum has to be like the children of Yaakov. We might have thought that maybe they have to be a brother who is in fact not pasul. Kamashmalan, that's not true, that any brother will suffice. Says the Gemara, why don't we learn the psukim that way? Why don't we say that if the brother's a mamzer that it's problematic? Answers the Gemara, miftar, because had it been that this person, had he been the son, that the father would have no yibum, therefore mizkak nami zakuk, therefore he can generate a zika, a bond of zika between his now dead brother, now his brothers who's passed away, his wife. Whereon there continues, we also said that this mamzer is considered a brother in all ways. What does that come to teach us? It's true for Yerusha, and it's also true for becoming tameh for him. What is this talking about? It's talking about a well-known din by a kohen, that a kohen is only allowed to become tameh for a certain group of people, and if his brother is a mamzer, he's still allowed to become tameh for the sake of his brother. Says the Gemara Pshita, that should be obvious. Echavu is his brother. Says the Gemara, no. Sal kadai techamina, I might have thought as follows. Because the pasuk pasuk says that he can only become tamei for someone who he's close to. V'amar mar she'ero zo ishto, and when the pasuk says she'er, it's speaking about his wife, who we know he can become tamei to. Uchsiv lo yitama bal be'amav lehechalo, that you cannot become tamei for anyone. Yesh bal she'metame v'yesh bal she'ein metame. There are times to become tamei for her and sometimes not. Haketzad, what's the case? V'tamei hu leishto kshera. He can become tamei if his wife is a kshera. Ve'ein metame leishto psula. But you are not going to become tamei for ishto psula. So says the Gemara, hachanami, maybe I would have assumed by the brother who's a mamzer, the tamei hu la'ach kosher ve'ein metame la'ach paseh. If the person's a mamzer, have a meaning that by a kohen, that the brother who is a kohen, who's not a mamzer, that he's not allowed to become tamei for his brother who's a mamzer. Kamash malan, that's not true. Ve'em hachanami, why don't we assume that that's true? It's a great deal. If it's true by a wife, why isn't it true by a brother? Says the Gemara, hasam, by marriage, it's la afuke kaima. It's to make sure that we know that it's prohibited, but hacha echafu, that there are dinim that, as it relates to a wife, that are different than the dinim of a brother. We're a quarter of the way down. The Gemara says, why is it that if the mother of this brother is an ovedes kochavim or a shifcha, why is it that we're not talking about him? Why there's no yibum? Because my time amar kraha isha biladeha tihya ladoneh. Because if he's an eved, if the mother's an eved, then the children belong to the master. They're not in the same category. Says the Gemara, Mishiyesh lo ben mikol makom pater. What is it talking about this child? Similar answer. Before we were talking about the brother as it relates to yibum. Now we're talking about the child as it relates to exempting yibum. Says the Gemara, mikol makom la'asuye mai. Amar Yehuda. We're talking about a child la'asuye mamzer. He was born out of an illicit relationship. My time. What is the reason why we say that this child what do we say is the source for this? My time. Amar Kra. Uven ein lo. Ayin Allah. The pasuk says Uven ein lo, that he has no child, and the Gemara makes a drasha with an ayin instead of an aleph. Ayin Allah. We need to look into him. What is this talking about? It says Rashi is 6 lines down from the top. Libra maskil uven ein lo. Matzi lemechtav uven ein lo without a yud. Kidei aminim b'kiddushin. O kesef ukemo me'ein yevami. And as well me'ein bilam. So we see in those cases that there's no yud. Ulahachi kasav ein with a yud lemidrash to teach us the following: Ayin alav de'im yesh lo ben be'olam poter. If he has any child at all, mamzer or otherwise, he will then be exempt from yibum. The Gemara continues, V'chayev alav makaso. If he hits his father, he'll be chayev. Says the Gemara, Amai, what's the deal here? Karikan v'nasi ve'amecha lo saor be'ose ma'ase amcha. What is this talking about? Take a look at Rashi as well. Be'ose ma'ase amcha v'hay aviv lav ose ma'ase amcha sharei ba'al v'gerva v'holid mimeno mamzer. The father wasn't following all of the rules. So it's a little bit of a chiddush. Maybe we should say the father is not eligible for the isser of makaso because he married a woman in erva and they produced a mamzer. That should be problematic. So maybe we're assuming he's not a regular father. Says the Gemara, Pinchas Mishmei Rav Papa be'osa tshuva. You're right if the father hasn't done tshuva, but if he has done tshuva, then you're good to go. Hachanami, and Rav Papa was talking about something else here too. In our case, if the father who bore this child mamzer due to having relations with an erva, as long as he's done tshuva, all is well. Says the Gemara, we already learned about this. V'hai bar tshuva. How can you say that there is any tshuva when it comes to this person? Well, it's not. Shimon ben Benasi Omer Ezo me'uvas lo yuchal liskon. We've learned this before. Where did we learn this? In Chagiga. What is a me'uvas lo yuchal liskon? What is an error that you are not able to fix? So how can you tell me that the child is going to be chayiv in hitting his father if the father had a child with an arayos and yielded a mamzer? Hooray! After all, he's a rasha. He did something wrong. That's not right. So says the Gemara, he must have done tshuva. But how can you do tshuva if it's a mamzer? If you bore a mamzer, says the Gemara, hashta miha osem ma'aseh amchahu. You're right, Pataka, you can't undo the damage, but at the end of the day, much as you can't undo the damage, the fact is that right now he recognizes he made an error. Fine. The Gemara halfway down gets into the sum of the Mari Makomos on the following halachic sugya. Tana Rabban, and we have a brisa. Haba lachoso. If a person is intimate with achoso, with his sister, he bas eshes av, and she is the daughter of your father's wife. So it's a half sister. Chayiv mishum 2 things. Number 1, chayiv mishum achoso, because that's similar to tashmish with an achoso with his sister, and as well mishum bas eshes aviv, and as well for being megala knaf aviv, she indirectly really that's probably not the right pasuk, but she was with the daughter of his father's wife. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he disagrees. He's only chayiv one on achoso if he's intimate with a half-sister, but not for two isur. Now we're going to get into the lumdis behind this. We'll go to the last word on the page and then we'll stop. Says the Gemara, why is it that the rabbis say that he's obligated in two different isurim? It says the Gemara, Amre, they say as follows, Michti, let's analyze. Ksiv, the pasuk says, that there's erva with a half-sister. It also says, why would I need that second pasuk? After all, who cares? I already have one iser. So obviously, because there's a second pasuk, it means shema mino l'chayvo mishum achos. So umishum bas isha savi. So therefore, we see that with a half sister, you have two isurim. That's a sheet of the Rabban. What would Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda say about this? We do have two psukim. How does he read the psukim? So it says Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omar kra achos chahi. He makes a drasha from the pasuk that says achos chahi. Mishum achos atamechayvo v'yatamechayvo mishum bas isha savi. You only have one iser and you don't have two isurim. Only for achoso and not for your father's wife's daughter. What about that drasha? No. Hi achos chahi my abli. They use those words for something else. Miboilehu the chayvo al achoso. Bas aviv bas imo lomar she'ein mazhirin min adin. We have a full extra pasuk here to teach us that we are not allowed to be mazhir min adin. We are not allowed to generate an isser all on our own. Here's what's going on in the Gemara right now. If the pasuk already told us that with a half sister that there's an isser tash mishamita, you're chayv mishum achoso. So that's true even if it's only on one side, mother or father. The pasuk is explicit about that. Then the second pasuk says that there's nachan isser when it comes to achoso, and there's a second isser. Why are you saying the same exact thing twice? You already told me I can make my own kal v'chomer. You already told me that with a half sister that there's an isser tash mishamita. Certainly with both parents is an isser tash mishamita. So if she's a sister of both parents, a full sibling on both sides, of course there's going to be an isser tash mish. Why did the Torah go out of its way? We could have easily made a kal v'chomer on our own. If there's an isser of achoso when the brother and the half sister share only one parent, all the more so when there's two. Says the Gemara, the reason why the Torah went out of the way is to teach you ein masir min adin. You're not allowed to generate an isser doraisa from min adin, from your own kal v'chomer. The Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, how did he respond to this? So it says the Gemara as follows: I could have learned that out just from the word achoscha. What about the word he? He lamali. What does the word he teach me? Says the Gemara, I learned from that one word that mishum achoscha tomachayvo v'yatomachayvo mishum bas isha. You only have one chiyuv and it's learned out from the word he. What would the Rabbanan say to this drasha? They say, no, that word is not extra. We still need the word he in the Torah. That's where they learn out in mazhirin min adin from, is from that extra word. And if you're going to say that when the Torah says achoscha, why do I need that? After all, I might have thought that the Torah went out of its way to teach us this din, that there is a kal v'chomer to be made, v'chasav lakra, kasav rachmanahi. That's why we had the word he to teach us that there ain't mazhirin min adin. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, what would you say to that? So says the Gemara, no, that's not right. He says, then it should have been located in the other pasuk, the primary pasuk, which speaks about the isra of achoso. Why is it in a different pasuk? Says the Gemara, that's why Rabbi Yossi holds that there's only one. That's why he holds that there's only one isra. 8 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Hai bas isha savicha, my avidle. If Rabbi Yossi is not using this second pasuk to learn out that the half sister, that the father's wife's daughter is the second isser, then what does he do with that pasuk? Because it's unused. We know what the Rabbanan do with it. They say there's 2 isurim for the half sister, one for achoso, and one for being with the daughter of the wife of your father. It says the Gemara, only in a case where there's actual marriage would there be such an isser. Prat la'achoso, prat la'achoso, mishivcha ve'ovedes kochavim she'ein ishus la'avicha ba. But not to say in a case where the mother was a shivcha. That's not correct. There would be no formal proper isser in that case. Says the Gemara, maybe we should say prat la'achoso me'anusa. Maybe we should say we're not talking about people who inherently have a psul for being a mother to a Yiddish maiden, like Mabel, you have a you have a shivcha and ovedes kochavim. Maybe it's just a case where there was no ishus, like the Gemara said, but it was an anusa, it was a regular woman. Lav dafka that it was an anusa where there was a violating someone. It could have been any woman who's not not a psul minei ubei, like a shivcha and like an ovedes kochavim. Says the Gemara, you cannot say that we're talking about an anusa here. That daughter of an anusa, of a random relationship with someone, granted you shouldn't be with, but they're not a shivcha, but a random woman, just not a wife, that we cannot say. Hahilo matzis amris. How do we know that? Midu Rava. Because as we will see, when Rava contrasts two psukim, we'll see that one of the options is that in fact this child was a child of an anusa, and we still see that she is a Yiddish child. Says the Gemara, what does Rava say? 3 lines from the bottom. The Rava compared and contrasted two psukim. One pasuk says, Ksiv ervas bas bincha uvas bitcha lo segale, that the granddaughter, that there's an isser over there for a relationship. What is implied from there? Habas binna dida, ubas bita dida, that from her side of the family that it would be permissible from the wife's side. Yet the other pasuk says, "Uchsiv ervas isha ubita lo sigale," and esbas binna esbas bita, even her grandchild. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, haketzad kan beonsin kan benison. It depends. There's going to be a difference in application of the isser of a granddaughter on the paternal side or on the maternal side, depending on whether or not that marriage was b'kiddushin. We'll stop right here. In the Mirz Hashem, Wednesday morning in person, we will be having Daf Yomi after the 6:30 Shachris. Wishing you all a beautiful day.